Hi folks, let's talk about Project 2. So Project 2 in 61B is always the incredibly challenging, really pushing you to the limit, making you grapple with complexity in terms of large system buildings project. Now that's not different this semester, but what is different this semester is that we're going to give you a lot of leeway this time around in terms of what you're actually building. So for example, in Spring 15, the project was implement this subset of the Git version control software. And it has to have this exact behavior. Spring 16 was build a text editor. And we told you exactly where the pixels needed to be and how everything was supposed to behave, how word wrap worked. In Spring 17, it was implement this subset of SQL, and it needs to handle database queries in just this certain way. But in Spring 18, we're only going to have a kind of loose picture of what you're supposed to build, and you're going to make decisions on your own. So let's talk a little bit about the goal, right? So in this project, you're going to build an explorable two-dimensional world, which for lack of a term that really works for that, I'll just call it a game. Now, this is not a game for those of you who've played video games in the past. In the classic sense of the word, it's not going to have some very rich behavior, probably. It's going to be more about building the interface, generating the world, and if you want, you can start trying to add gameplay elements, but that's not a core piece of it. Okay? So to give you a sense of what I mean in terms of what you might build, the game you're going to build is going to be a 2D tile-based game. So an example of such a game is, well, here's Zelda 2 from Nintendo from when I was a tiny kid. This is a graphical 2D tile-based overhead game. This is you, the character. This is a path you can walk around in. Everything's on a grid. There's forests. There's a little village and so forth here. Okay. Now, there are also a lot of text-based games that are the same idea, where, again, we have an overhead perspective. Here we have a player, which you can't really tell is an @ sign in this video. There's walls represented by pound signs. There's floors represented by dots. And this game, by the way, is a game called BYOG, that some of the aesthetics and provided tiles that we're going to give you for this game come from BYOG. I think it's a nice-looking project, just from the perspective of its aesthetics. So the ultimate goal is for you to build something pretty much from the ground up, though we are going to give you a little something, but you're going to build things mostly from the ground up, this explorable, randomly generated two-dimensional world. Now, the piece we are going to give you is a rendering engine. I'm not going to describe it in this video, but in Lab 5, you'll get a sense of how it works, but that will save you the trouble of having to think about individual pixels. Instead, you're going to have a relatively easy-to-use interface where you just provide a 2D array of tile objects, and it'll draw it for you. So if it seems intimidating to think about drawing something like this, or even like this, we've got the pixel-level stuff handled for you. But everything else, in terms of the world generation and the mechanics you might include for the game, everything else is all on you. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about what you're going to ultimately build by giving an example. And I'm going to run here the bare bones version of the game that I built just to satisfy the spec. Okay? So when you start up the game here, I get new, load, quit. This is my basic menu. I press in for new, and it says to enter seed. So the seed is, we'll talk about it in Lab 5, but it's a number used to randomly generate the world. So if I type in the number 558, or well, 559, it's going to use that as the magic number that it generates the world from. So if I now press S, a world is generated, and I can walk around in it. So if I start pressing keys, that's my character, the @ sign, walking around. And here we see that it's some big space. We got rooms, we got hallways. If I mouse over certain spots, like this right here, I get wall. Here it says nothing. Here we have player, and there is locked door. Okay. Now, one thing that's really important about the game is that given a particular random seed, if I play again, and I say new seed 559, and I press seed, look, I get the exact same world. If I quit and I pick a different seed, 1, 2, 3, let's say, now I get yet a totally different world. Here we are. Okay. And next up, I guess, that was strange. There was no magic door in that one. All right, new bug I never seen before. But if I walk around here in this world, this tile here is a locked door. So in my particular game, there's one thing you can do. I mean, you can walk around and explore, but there's one thing that you can also do to, in my case, win the game, which is to open the door and leave it, and it says, you left. Good job, you win. Okay? So I'm not going to talk in detail about the interactivity and how that works in this video, but that's a picture of the bare bones thing you might build for your game. You'll notice that my game didn't have like treasures or animals that I could pet. There was no mechanic for like breeding horses where you can watch them race or whatever else. So you can imagine doing all kinds of crazy stuff. You couldn't do it in my game. It was very simple, and that's fine. That's all you got to do for this project. Okay? Now the one last thing I want to mention, because it's worth thinking about before you start Lab 5, is what the world is going to need to look like that you generate. So the world that you build has to be a two-dimensional grid, and it needs to be drawn using the tile engine that Lab 5 covers. It also needs to be pseudo-randomly generated, and we'll discuss what pseudo-random means in Lab 5, not in this video. The generated world has to have rooms and hallways. So if we look at this picture here, there is a room, there are some hallways, here are some hallways. And those are just arbitrary requirements so that you have something to think about. The rooms, at least some of them need to be rectangular, but you can have hexagonal or octagonal or whatever other rooms you might want. The game has to be able to make hallways that include turns, like this. That's equivalent to saying hallways that intersect. So two hallways that intersect is the same thing as one hallway that turns, however you want to think about it. The world has to have a random number of rooms and hallways. The locations have to be random. The width and height of the rooms has to be random. The length of the hallway should be random. The walls should be visually distinct from the floors, which should in turn be visually distinct from outside space. The rooms and hallways should be connected. That is, you shouldn't have a bunch of disjoint rooms, nor should there be weird gaps here where like this is the nothing tile in between. And then lastly, the world needs to be different each time. Because one of the most interesting things about building a game like this is once you come up with an algorithm, seeing the worlds it's able to generate. So the randomness is key, because otherwise you're just going to have some hard-coded world that probably won't be all that interesting. Okay? So that's a flavor of what you're going to build. In the following videos, I'll talk in more detail about the phases, things you might consider, but that's what you need to know in order to have a big picture understanding of the project. So I hope you find it really interesting to build. Now I'll say that the game that I built, it's not very fun. You saw, right? I walk around, I can open a door, hooray. However, I found the process of building the world really, really interesting, and if I so chose, it's a really good foundation to start adding new things, like, say, creatures wandering around the world. All right, that's it. Enjoy the project. Let us know what you think. Totally new, big, crazy idea to let you kind of decide your fate, and see you in the next video.